centers of the world. Professor, may I begin our questions?
At any time, Miss Phillips.
Professor, would you please tell our radio audience exactly what you see as you observe the planet Mars through your telescope?
Nothing unusual at the moment, Miss Phillips. A red disk swimming in a blue sea, transverse stripes across the disk. Quite distinct now because Mars happens to be the point nearest the Earth, in opposition, as we call it.
In your opinion, do these transverse stripes signify? What do they signify, Professor Pearson?
Not canals, I can assure you, Miss Phillips, although that's the popular conjecture of those who imagine Mars to be inhabited. From a scientific viewpoint, the stripes are merely the result of atmospheric conditions peculiar to the planet.
Then you're quite convinced, as a scientist, that living intelligence as we know it does not exist on Mars?
I'd say the chances against it are 1,000 to 1.
And yet, how do you account for those gas eruptions occurring on the surface of the planet at regular intervals?
Miss Phillips, I cannot account for it.
By the way, Professor, for the benefit of our listeners, how far is Mars from Earth?
Approximately 40 million miles.
Well, that seems a safe enough distance.
Thank you.
Just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Someone has just handed Professor Pearson a message. While he reads it, let me remind you that we are speaking to you from the observatory in Princeton, New Jersey, where we are interviewing the world-famous astronomer, Professor Pearson. One moment, please. Professor Pearson has passed me a message which he has just received. Professor, may I read the message to the listening audience?
Certainly, Miss Phillips.
Ladies and gentlemen, I shall now read you a wire addressed to Professor Pearson from Dr. Gray of the National History Museum, New York. 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Seismograph registered shock of almost earthquake intensity occurring within a radius of 20 miles of Princeton. Please investigate. Signed, Lloyd Gray, Chief of Astronomical Division. Professor Pearson, could this occurrence possibly have something to do with the disturbances observed on the planet Mars?
Hardly, Miss Phillips. This is probably a meteorite of unusual size, and its arrival at this particular time is merely a coincidence. However, we shall conduct a search as soon as daylight permits.
Thank you, Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, for the past 10 minutes, we've been speaking to you from the observatory at Princeton, bringing you a special interview with Professor Pearson, noted astronomer.
Bobby Millett and his orchestra are offering a program of dance music. Now to Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Carla Phillips again at the Wilmouth Farm, Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Professor Pearson and myself made the 11 miles from Princeton in 10 minutes. Well, I hardly know where to begin to paint for you a word picture of the strange scene before my eyes, like something out of the object itself. Doesn't look very much like a meteor, at least not the meteors I've seen. It looks more like a huge cylinder. It has a diameter of, what would you say, Professor Pearson?
What's that?
What would you say? What is the diameter?
About 30 yards.
About 30 yards. The metal on the sheath is, well, I've never seen anything like it. The color is sort of a yellowish white. Curious spectators are now pressing close to the object in spite of the efforts of the police to keep them back. 25 feet away. Can you hear it now? Ah, Professor Pearson.
Yes, Miss Phillips.
Can you tell us the meaning of that scraping noise inside the thing?
It's possibly the unequal cooling of the surface.
I see. Do you still think it's a meteor, Professor?
I don't know what to think. The metal casing is definitely extraterrestrial, not found on this Earth. Friction with the Earth's atmosphere usually tears holes in a meteorite. This thing is smooth and, as you can see, of cylindrical shape.
Just a minute. Something's happening. Ladies and gentlemen, this is terrific. The end of the thing is beginning to flake off. The top is beginning to rotate like a screw. The thing must be Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. Wait a minute. Someone's crawling out of the hollow top. Someone or something. I can see 5 feet away. Can you hear it now? Ah, Professor Pearson.
Yes, Miss Phillips.
Can you tell us the meaning of that scraping noise inside the thing?
It's possibly the unequal cooling of the surface.
I see. Do you still think it's a meteor, Professor?
I don't know what to think. The metal casing is definitely extraterrestrial, not found on this Earth. Friction with the Earth's atmosphere usually tears holes in a meteorite. This thing is smooth and, as you can see, of cylindrical shape.
Just a minute. Something's happening. Ladies and gentlemen, this is terrific. The end of the thing is beginning to flake off. The top is beginning to rotate like a screw. The thing must be hollow. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. Wait a minute. Someone's crawling out of the hollow top. Someone or something. I can see peering up.
He will give you his explanation of this calamity. The next voice you hear will be that of Professor Pearson, brought to you by direct wire. Professor Pearson.
Of the creatures in the rocket cylinder at Grover's Mill, I can give you no authoritative information, either as to their nature, their origin, or their purposes here on Earth of their destructive instrument. I might venture some conjectural explanation. For want of a better term, I shall refer to the mysterious weapon as a heat ray. It's all too evident that these creatures have scientific knowledge far in advance of our own. It is my guess that in some way they are able to generate the intense heat in a chamber of practically absolute non-conductivity. This intense heat they project in a parallel beam against any object they choose by means of a polished parabolic mirror of unknown composition, much as the mirror of a lighthouse projects a beam of light. That is my conjecture of the origin of the heat ray.
Thank you, Professor Pearson. Ladies and gentlemen, here is...
As I set down these notes on paper, I'm obsessed by the thought that I may be the last living man on Earth. I have been hiding in this empty house near Grover's Mill, a small island of daylight cut off by the black smoke from the rest of the world. All that happened before the arrival of these monstrous creatures in the world now seem part of another life. A life that has no continuity with the present, furtive existence of the lonely derelict who pencils these words on the back of some astronomical notes bearing the signature of Richard Pearson. I look down at my blackened hands, my torn shoes, my tattered clothes. I try to connect them with the professor who lives at Princeton and who on the night of October 22nd glimpsed through his telescope an orange splash of light on a distant planet. My wife, my colleagues, my students, my books, my observatory, my world. Where are they? Did they ever exist? Am I Richard Pearson? What day is it? Do days exist without calendars? Does time pass when there are no human hands left to wind the clocks? In writing down my daily life, I tell myself I shall preserve human history between the dark covers of this little book that was meant to record the movements of the stars. But to write, I must live, and to live, I must eat. I find moldy bread in the kitchen and an orange not too spoiled to swallow. I keep watch at the window. From time to time, I catch sight of a Martian above the black smoke. The smoke still holds the house in its black coil. But at length, there is a hissing sound, and suddenly I see a Martian mounted on his machine, spraying the air with a jet of steam, as if to dissipate the smoke. I watch in a corner as his huge metal legs nearly brush against the house. Exhausted by terror, I fall asleep. Morning, sun streams in the window. The black clouds of gas has lifted, and the scorched meadows to the north looks as though a black snowstorm has passed over them. I venture from the house. I make my way to a road. No traffic. Here and there, a wrecked car, baggage overturned, a blackened skeleton. I push on north. For some reason, I feel safer trailing these monsters and running away from them, and I keep a careful watch. I have seen the Martians feed. Should one of their machines appear over the top of trees, I am ready to fling myself flat on the earth. I come to a chestnut tree. October chestnuts are ripe. I fill my pockets. I must keep alive. Two days I wander in a vague northerly direction through a desolate world. Finally, I notice a living creature, a small red squirrel in a beech tree. I stare at him and wonder. He stares back at me. I believe at that moment the animal and I shared the same emotion, the joy of finding another living being. I push on north. I find dead cows in a brackish field. Beyond, the charred ruins of a dairy. The silo remains standing guard over the wasteland like a lighthouse deserted by the sea. Astride the silo perches a weathercock. The arrow points north. Next day, I come to a city vaguely familiar in its contours, yet its buildings strangely dwarfed and leveled off, as if a giant hand sliced off the highest towers with a capricious sweep of his hand. I reached the outskirts. I found Newark, undemolished, but humbled by some whim of the advancing Martians. Presently, with an odd feeling of being watched, I caught sight of something crouching in a doorway. I made a step towards it, and it rose up and became a man armed with a large knife.
Stop! Where did you come from?
I come from many places. A long time ago from Princeton.
Princeton, huh? Well, that's near Grover's Mill.
Yes.
Grover's Mill. There's no food here. This is my country. All this end of town, down to the river. There's only food for one. Which way are you going?
I don't know. I guess I'm looking for people.
What was that? Did you hear something just then?
Only a bird. A live bird.
You get to know the birds have shadows these days. Say, we're out in the open here. Let's crawl into this doorway and talk.
Have you seen any Martians?
Nah. They've gone over to New York. At night the sky is alive with their lights. Just as if people were still living in it. By daylight, you can't see them. But 5 days ago, a couple of them carried something big across the flats from the airport. I believe they're learning how to fly.
Fly?
Yeah, fly.
Then it's all over with humanity. Stranger, there's still you and I. Two of us left.
Oh, they got themselves in solid. They wrecked the greatest country in the world. Those green stars, they're probably falling somewhere every night. They've only lost one machine. There isn't anything to do. We're done. We're licked.
Where were you? You're in a uniform.
Yeah, what's left of it. I was in the militia, the National Guard. That's good. There wasn't any war anymore. Now there's war between men and ants.
And we're eatable ants. I found that out. What will they do with us?
I've thought it all out. Right now, we're caught as we're wanted. The Martian only has to go a few miles to get a crowd on the run. But they won't keep doing that. They'll begin catching us systematically. Keeping the best and storing us in cages and things. Oh, they haven't begun on us yet.
Not begun?
Not begun. You know, all this happened so far is because we don't have enough sense to keep quiet. Bothering them with guns and such stuff and losing our heads and rushing off in crowds. Now, instead of our rushing around blind, we gotta fix ourselves up. Fix ourselves up the way according to things are now. Cities, nations, civilization, progress, that's all done.
But if that's so, what is there to live for?
Well, there won't be any more concerts for 1,000,000 years or so. And no nice little dinners at restaurants. It's amusement you're after. I guess the game's up.
And what is there left?
Life. That's what. I want to live. Yeah, and so do you. And we're not going to be exterminated. And I don't need to be caught either, and tamed and fattened and bred like an ox.
Well, what are you going to do?
I'm going on. Right under their feet. Now, I got a plan. We men as men are finished. We don't know enough. We got to learn plenty before we got a chance. And we got to live and keep free while we learn, see? I've thought it all out, see?
Tell me the rest.
Well, it isn't all of us that were made for wild beasts, and that's what it's got to be. Well, that's why I watched you. All these little office workers that used to live in these houses, they'd be no good. They haven't any stuff to them. They just used to run off to work. And I've seen hundreds of them, running wild to catch their commuter train in the morning for fear they'd get canned if they didn't, and then running back at night afraid they won't be home in time for dinner. Lives insured and a little invested in case of accidents. Oh, and on Sundays, worried about the hereafter. The Martians will be a godsend for those guys. Nice roomy cages, good food, careful breeding, no worries. After a week or so chasing about the fields on empty stomachs, they'll come to be glad to be caught.
You've thought it all out, haven't you?
Oh, you bet I have. Oh, and that isn't all. These Martians will make pets out of some of them and train them to do tricks. Who knows? Get sentimental over the pet boy who grew up and had to be killed. And some maybe they'll train to hunt us.
No, that's impossible. No human being.
Yes, they will. The men will do it gladly. Well, if one of them ever comes after
In the
me,
meantime, you and I and others like us, where are we to live when the Martians own the Earth?
I've got it all figured out. We'll live underground. I've been thinking about the sewers. Under New York are miles and miles of them. The main ones are big enough for anybody. Well, then there's the cellars and vaults, underground storerooms, railway tunnels, and subways. You begin to see, eh? And we'll get a bunch of strong men together. No weak ones. That rubbish, that's out.
And you meant me to go?
Well, I gave you a chance, didn't I?
We won't quarrel about that. Go on.
And we've got to make safe places for us to stay in, see, and get all the books we can. Science books. That's where men like you come in, see? We'll raid the museums. We'll even spy on the Martians. It may not be so much we have to learn before. Well, just imagine this. 4 or 5 of their own fighting machines suddenly start off. Heat rays right and left. And not a Martian in them. Not a Martian in them, but men. Men who have learned the way how. It may even be in our time. Gee, imagine having one of them lovely things with its heat ray wide and free. We turn it on the Martians. We turn it on men. We bring everybody down to their knees.
So that's your plan?
Well, you and me and a few more of us that we'd own the world.
I see.
Say, what's the matter? Where are you going?
Not to your world. Goodbye, stranger. After parting with the artilleryman, I came at last to the Holland Tunnel. I entered that silent tube, anxious to know the fate of the great city on the other side of the Hudson. Cautiously, I came out of the tunnel and made my way up Canal Street. I reached 14th Street. And there again were black powder and several bodies, and an evil, ominous smell from the gratings of the cellars of some of the houses. I wandered up through the 30s and 40s. I stood alone on Times Square. I caught sight of a lean dog running down 7th Avenue with a piece of dark brown meat in his jaws and a pack of starving mongrels at his heels. He made a wide circle around me, and though he feared I might prove a fresh competitor. I walked up Broadway in the direction of that strange powder, past silent shop windows, displaying their mute wares to empty sidewalks, past the Capitol Theater, silent, dark, past a shooting gallery where a row of empty guns faced an arrested line of wooden ducks. Near Columbus Circle, I noticed models of 1939 motor cars in the showrooms, facing empty streets. From over the top of the General Motors building, I watched a flock of blackbirds circling in the sky. I hurried on, Suddenly, I caught sight of the hood of a Martian machine standing somewhere in Central Park, gleaming in the late afternoon sun. An insane idea. I rushed recklessly across Columbus Circle and into the park. I climbed the small hill above the pond at 60th Street. From there, I could see, standing in a silent row along the mall, 19 of those great metal titans, their cowls empty, their great steel arms hanging listlessly by their sides. I looked in vain for the monsters that inhabit those machines. Suddenly, my eyes were attracted to the immense flock of blackbirds that hovered directly below me. They circled to the ground, and there, before my eyes, stark and silent, lay the Martians, with the hungry birds pecking and tearing brown shreds of flesh from their dead bodies. Later, when their bodies were examined in the laboratories, it was found that they were killed by the putrefactive and diseased bacteria against which their systems were unprepared, slain after all man's defenses had failed, by the humblest thing that God, in his wisdom, put upon this earth. Before the cylinder fell, there was a general persuasion that through all the deep of space, no life existed beyond the petty surface of our minute sphere. Now we see further. Dim and wonderful is the vision I have conjured up in my mind of life spreading slowly from this little seedbed of the solar system throughout their inanimate vastness and sidereal space. But this is a remote dream. It may be that the destruction of the Martians is only a reprieve. To them, and not to us, is the future ordained, perhaps. Strange it now seems to sit by my peaceful study at Princeton, writing down this last chapter of the record begun at a deserted farm in Grover's Mill. Strange to see from my window the university spires dim and blue through an April haze. Strange to watch children playing in the streets. Strange to see young people strolling in the green, where the new spring grass heals the last black scars of a bruised earth. Strange to watch the sightseers enter the museum, where the disassembled parts of a Martian machine are kept on public view. Strange when I recall the time when I first saw it, bright and clean cut, hard and silent, under the dawn of that last great day.